Vietnam Veterans Against the War by John Kerry. Secretary John Forbes Kerry was born on December 11, 1943, to Richard John Kerry and Rosemary Isabel Forbes. Kerry spent much of his childhood living abroad because he was a military brat. He studied at Yale University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in political science. Secretary Kerry enlisted to serve in the United States Navy, where he served 2 tours of duty. When he returned from the war, Secretary Kerry began to forcefully speak out against the Vietnam War. He began a lifelong fight for his fellow veterans as a co-founder of the Vietnam Veterans of America. In 1984, he was elected to the United States Senate, where he served for 28 years, earning a reputation as a left-of-center legislator. In 2009, Secretary Kerry became chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and in December of 2012, Barack Obama nominated Kerry to be his next Secretary of State. Vietnam Veterans Against the War was a speech by John Kerry given to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the American public. It brought to light the horrific requirements of the soldiers serving in the Vietnam War. Kerry highlighted the irony in America forcing men to commit horrific deeds for peace and exemplified the effects that these requirements had on the soldiers. Through Kerry's first-hand experience with war, one can see the effects that war can have on a person, both mentally and physically. This speech is still remembered today in regard to troubles in the Middle East. America never wants to put another soldier's life on the line if a battle cannot be won. Subject. As seen on the handout, Kerry spoke for veterans, asserted that the negatives of the war outweighed the positives, and highlighted that the Vietnamese people were not necessarily the bad guys, saying, "I would like to talk on behalf of all those veterans. In our opinion, and from our experience, there's nothing in South Vietnam which could happen that realistically threatens the United States of America, and someone has to die so that President Nixon won't be," and these are his words, "the first president to lose a war." Occasion: April 23, 1971. Audience: the direct audience was the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, while the general public could view the speech on television. Purpose: Kerry, as seen in the speech, wanted to end the war as quickly as possible, saying, "Each day, to facilitate the process by which the United States washes her hands of Vietnam, someone has to give his life so that the United States doesn't have to admit something that the entire world already knows, so that we can't say that we have made a mistake." Speaker: Kerry stated that he would like to talk on behalf of all those veterans. Tone: as seen on the handout, Kerry's tone can be seen in the quote, "We are asking Americans to think about that. Because how do you ask a man to be the last man to die in Vietnam? How do you ask a man to be the last man to die for a mistake?" Diction: Kerry utilized the words us and we, saying, "We learned from the meaning of fire-free zones." Imagery: Kerry appeals to sympathy, saying, "They told stories that at times they had personally raped, cut off ears, cut off heads, taped wires from portable telephones to human generals, and turned on the power." Details: Kerry highlighted the horror of war with details, saying they had cut off limbs, blown up bodies, randomly shot at civilians, razed villages in fashions reminiscent of Genghis Khan, shot cattle and dogs for fun, poisoned foodstuffs, and generally ravaged the countryside of South Vietnam. Pathos: Kerry appeals to anger and resentment, saying, "We watched Pride allow the most unimportant battles to be blown into extravaganzas, because we couldn't lose, and we couldn't retreat, and because it didn't matter how many American bodies were lost to prove that point." Logos: Kerry makes a logical argument, saying, "In our opinion and from our experiences, there is nothing in South Vietnam which could happen that realistically threatens the United States of America, and to attempt to justify the loss of one American life in Vietnam, Cambodia, or Laos by linking such loss to the preservation of freedom, which those misfits supposedly abuse, it is to us the height of criminal hypocrisy, and it is that kind of hypocrisy which we feel has torn this country apart." Ethos: Kerry establishes his credentials, saying, "We found most people didn't even know the difference between communism and democracy." Repetition: Kerry repeats, we found, to establish ethos and to make sure the listener remembers that statement. Juxtaposition: Kerry juxtaposes war and peace throughout the speech. In this example, he juxtaposes destroying and saving a village. Rhetorical question: Kerry calls the listener to action, asking, "How do you ask a man to be the last man to die in Vietnam? How do you ask a man to be the last man to die for a mistake?" Allusion: Kerry alluded to an American Indian friend of his to show the mistakes America was making. Personification: Kerry personifies America, saying, We saw America lose her sense of morality as she accepted very coolly a My Lai and refused to give up the image of American soldiers who hand out chocolate bars and chewing gum.